hopes that you grab a piece of their testimony as inspiration. And as those pieces stack up, they become something beautiful. Today, I brought on John Oborn, and he seems to be having technical difficulties. So we are going to just talk about other stuff then. So until he's able to get back on, we will chat about something else. So John, he has an incredible story. At a very young age, he experienced a pretty traumatic event. Um, he at 10 years old, he had an AVM rupture, and that obviously shot his life into a completely different direction. And I could imagine that, that shook the family's foundation to the core. And I cannot wait for John to get on here and share with everyone what transpired. So without further ado, here is John. John, how you doing, brother?
All right, you?
Not too bad, man. Not too bad. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the community, John?
All righty. Anyways, name's John from the small town of Vienna, Illinois, which is southern Illinois, and so far south it'll take you less than 30 minutes to cross the Ohio River. So pretty far south.
Yeah. And how old are you, John?
I am 30.
30. And so how old were you when actually let's go ahead and dive into what happened. So what happened when with your whole ordeal?
Well, it was just regular old me. I'd had headaches before, but
Okay.
when it occurred was luckily at home with the family. I was just 10 years old when it happened and just
Okay.
had headaches every now and then, but I figured it was just because of allergies and stuff like that. Because I mean, Southern Illinois, we have Shawnee National Forest, stuff like that. So it can get pretty bad with pollen and all the fall leaves. So that's what I figured mostly the headaches were caused from.
Yeah.
But yeah, as
And
for this AVM, it did a little bit more than cause a headache.
well, yeah, I would imagine so. So you're at home, right? And you
Yeah.
said it was just an ordinary day.
Yeah.
And obviously being 10 years old. So you said that up until 10 years old you were getting headaches. Were they just like regular headaches? Would you call them like severe headaches?
Most of them I thought were just regular headaches, but every now and then there might be a real bad one. And I never
Yeah.
really thought about it being in the same place all the time, but it probably was. It's been so long ago. I mean, can't even really
Yeah.
remember.
Well,
And that's
yeah, I
actually
mean,
quite rare because I hardly ever have a headache anymore. I guess
yeah.
that's good news, but kind of freaky.
Right. So on that specific day, I mean, I would assume it being so long ago, but have you heard stories from your family on like exactly what happened?
Yeah, I mean, I remember only bits and pieces, but they, of course, remember a lot of it.
Right. Right.
Mostly what I remember from the bleed is I was actually just sitting back in a lounge chair, took a Tylenol, and then I remember my right eye got really blurry vision and then just blacked out because of the pain.
Yeah.
But as for the
And
family, they then picked me up, got me in the car, rushed me to the hospital, and then there you go.
boom. Just boom, boom, bang.
Yeah,
10-year-old with the AVM that ruptured.
yeah,
That's just freaking crazy, man.
yeah.
Crazy. Insane. So, obviously a traumatic event like that. that's something that's going to shake, your family to the core, and it's
Yeah.
going to, as we all know, as that's something that shifts not only your life, especially someone being that young, it shifts your whole family's life in a different direction. So before we jump into all this stuff, let's touch on that a little bit. How did it shift your whole family's direction because that happened? How would you say that took
Well,
place?
family direction, I mean, it was, of course, crazy for him because I'm not the only boy. I'm actually the little one in the family.
Oh, really? How many
Two older
siblings do you have?
brothers.
Okay,
Two older brothers.
how old were they?
I'm trying to think. I think everybody was 5 years apart. So you had the oldest one, Darren, who was 20. Then you had the middle child, Malcolm, who was 5. And then you had me, the little guy.
Oh, wow. Wow. Wow, that's crazy. So okay, so let's then dive into what happened. So your AVM, it ruptured. They rushed you to the hospital. Then what happened next from there?
Well, they took me to the local hospital in Paducah, Kentucky. But Paducah was like, of course, they were like, yeah, we don't do brain surgery. So then they got me in a plane and then flew me all the way to Louisville, Kentucky.
Okay.
Went to the hospital that was called, been to so many hospitals, I got to think which one it was called now. It's like right at the tip of my tongue. What was it called? Frazier. That's what it was called. That's
Okay. And then what happened there?
Well, they took me in, did an MRI. Luckily, the bleeding had stopped, but now I have an eye-sized blood clot in the left side of my brain. So the doctors basically explained, it's like, we're going to try and remove that, but we're going to have to wait for the swelling to go down for a little bit, because they kind of joked about it. They're like, put it this way, you just had a professional boxer hit your son in the head. We're going to have to wait for the swelling to go down.
Hmm. So once the swelling went down, what was the next step that the doctors took?
Well, of course, they wanted to check for MRIs, CAT scans, all that fun stuff, and also seeing just what was damaged in the brain. And the position on me is what I think is called the temporal and occipital lobe section.
Okay.
And I don't know how to show it, but it's like the left center area of the brain.
Okay. And
And
what
affects speech and eyesight's what it affects. Yeah.
okay. Speech and eyesight. So did you have uh any effects from there, like towards your speech and your eyesight?
Speech is, say, rather a complicated version of saying how it's damaged because, I mean, for instance, giving a speech now, but I'll get to that maybe when I get to the therapy. As for vision, I was still blind for about, say, maybe a week, but the swelling went down and then was able
Yeah.
to see. And vision to this day, it's not perfect. Mainly what it damaged was just peripheral vision. For instance, I can't see my right hand till right here. That's how bad it is.
Wow.
So, yeah, believe it or not, I do drive too.
I won't tell nobody if you don't tell nobody. Right.
But that was mostly the vision part. The speech part was rather interesting because it wasn't me being able to speak, but just processing memory of words. For instance, when I was like in speech therapy, they just pull out like a picture of an animal, and like the brain would know what it was, but you just couldn't think of the word to call it. So it'd be like
Mhm.
a simple one, like a dog. I'd be like, crap, I have one. We call her Blackie. I just can't think of what it's called.
Right.
So it
And
was
then
just a complete mess with the memory. They kind of explained it was sort of like somebody hacks into your computer and they don't delete the files, but they just throw them everywhere and everything says new folder. So now you have to reorganize it.
mhm. So you're 10 years old. That puts you in like what, third grade?
It was the end of fourth
The end of fourth. I was way off. But so
year.
yeah, so the end of fourth grade, you have your AVM rupture, right?
Yeah.
And you essentially have to relearn how to talk again, right?
Well,
And,
speech was say interesting because again, I could speak, but yeah, it's just the loss of words. Like again, I
right.
said, they pulled out the object and just couldn't remember it.
Yeah. So, say for instance, like you're having a conversation with your friend, right? And you would be talking and you would just sometimes not be able to, how would it work? You wouldn't be able to have
process a
like a
word or something.
fluid conversation? Is that how it worked?
Somewhat, but it was more just say objects or things like that would I'd have issues with.
Mm-hmm.
It's like say
So
basic words, no problem. But for instance, maybe they were pointing and say some tool, and I'd be like, yeah.
right. So you didn't have any like physical, or excuse me, you didn't have any physical effects from it?
Physical was definitely damaged too.
Okay.
It's just weird how the brain works though, because it's like it's damaged on the left, but that affected all the right side of the body.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously to this day, I mean, it's not really noticeable, but my right leg was like the biggest issue. Right hand actually came back okay, but the foot was the biggest problem because they could not get that thing to work. They actually did electric shock therapy to make that thing work again.
Okay.
They actually do that in sports. It tightens muscles. So if you've ever seen that done, I don't know if you have, but they would put straps on my leg and it's like, okay, try and move it. And I'd be like, I'm trying, it's not doing anything. They're like, okay, we're going to zap it. And they'd zap it and it would move. It was quite entertaining. But to this day, I mean, it's not noticeable what's wrong with that leg, but say it has minor things. For instance, like when I did track, they could kind of tell if I was behind them because my left foot would run heel toe, but my right foot would just run slap flat.
Mm-hmm.
Another
Yeah.
kind of comical thing is like I can wiggle my left toes, but my right toes, I can just barely bend them.
Yeah. No. And so this is going into the fifth grade, right? So are you able to, when you go into the fifth grade, are you able to, like, what deficits do you have going into the fifth grade?
Well, fifth grade was the big issue because after I got done with my surgery in Louisville, I still kept having seizures. Seizures were not, say, the huge ones. They weren't the type where you have like what are called grand mal seizures where you fall down on the ground, but would usually just mostly go into shock, wouldn't be responsive for a minute or two. I had what some people call tunnel vision. That usually means like both your peripheral vision kind of gets tight, but mine actually did it the opposite way. It was kind of where you go from full screen to widescreen, say at a movie theater. It was really weird.
So the seizures would just come out of nowhere, or would they say that like something would trigger it, or
Mostly what was triggering it was just the damage in the brain. And they gave me medication and it would work for a little while, but then like the medication wouldn't be enough. And then they would switch me again and then it might work a little while, but then by the end of the week I'd have another one.
Mhm.
So they just kept switching me constantly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have seizures myself, and I was falling into something similar like that. Like my body would kind of like get used to, it almost seemed like, I mean, I don't really know, but it almost seemed like my body was like, would get used to the medication to some
Yeah.
extent. And then, I'd have a seizure or whatnot. But
Yeah.
luckily I got on, the right medication. I haven't had one in somewhere
Yeah.
around 5 years or so. But
That was where they had to change it for me though, because I had seizures constantly. That's when they decided, hey, let's go to Children's Hospital instead of over in Louisville. I went to St. Louis. And then they did some more tests. That's where it got a little
yeah.
crazy.
So let's talk about that then. What were the type of tests that they ran? Do you know? Do you
They
remember?
did, of course, more MRIs. St. Louis's MRI was a heck of a lot different than Louisville's. I'll admit to that. That thing, it's like you think you're not claustrophobic until you get into one of those things.
Mm-hmm.
But then they did what's called an EEG scan. I don't know if you've ever had one of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they, of course, did a bunch of wires on your head, put you in front of a strobe light, basically,
Yeah.
flash you like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And it showed the medication was working at first, but then they kind of were like, hey, we're going to do something that you're not going to like, but we want you to actually have a seizure.
Right.
So they did a little bit of what I kind of call the half surgery, but they scalped the top of my head, put wires on the actual brain this time. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the actual brain. And then they took away my medication and made me have a grand mal seizure. And
That sounds fun.
yeah, it was not a good morning. But they saw that there were 3, say, damaged tissue that were causing the seizure.
Okay.
So they were like, well, we're of course going to have to do brain surgery again, and it's going to be more than 1, but 3 more. As for the type of surgery, I think it was some type of laser.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just taking off the damaged tissue and just making sure that would stop the seizures.
Yeah. So, because this was from the initial surgery, right? Because the
Well, the
initial,
first one was in Louisville. That was what was, I don't know what they call it. I think it was called cradiotomy, but they removed the
right,
skull, do the surgery, removed the blood clot. But then when I
okay,
went to St. Louis, that's when they did more tests, and there was just like, there's still itty bitty, like small pieces that they couldn't tell in Louisville. That's why they sent me to St. Louis, because they just have better tech. And they're like,
hmm,
we're going to try and remove those pieces now. They
yeah,
said my blood clot like built up so much pressure, it was like a bomb went off in that thing.
that's crazy.
Yeah.
So, so the AVM, you had the AVM that bursted, and then a blood clot after that,
Yeah.
and then, so
And
did the
then
blood?
after they removed the blood clot, that was where there was just damaged tissue in the brain that was causing me to have seizures. So they were like, if we can remove that, that will stop the seizing from happening.
Hmm. Wow, that's intense, man. That's intense. So, did we have here? Uh, it's going a little bit back a little bit, but Jenna wants to know: did the zap hurt when they zapped, trying to wake up the nerves in your foot?
It was, say, entertaining because I remember they would just put like these 4 straps on my leg. And they're like, okay, we're going to basically do Frankenstein's monster here to your leg. And it's not that many volts, but it makes you grit your teeth. And they would do it, say, 1 or 3 times maybe. And of course, every time they would turn it off, my leg would just drop. And I had to, of course, do that constantly for about a month. And it came back. It's just, say, kind of entertaining to this foot to this day. It's like, it's fine. It's just a little annoying that I can like wiggle my left toes and my right toes. I can just barely bend.
Hmm. Hmm. Jenna also wants to know if you are still on your seizure medication.
Yeah, I'm on what's called Keppra and Triliptal. The reason I'm still on the medication is because it's sort of what's missing in the brain. They tried to reduce me after my surgery, and they were just wondering if that would work. Didn't work, and they kind of did more fun tests, and they kind of said it's sort of like what's causing the seizures is what's missing in the brain now. I think the best way one of the doctors described it is he said, picture your brain like, or your brain cells kind of like traffic lights, like a red light, green light. That's how it works. But now that I'm missing those parts of the brain, it's like there's no traffic light, all green lights, seizure happens. So they're like, take the pills, that'll fix the, say, seizing.
Hmm.
And I've been on the same pills for over a decade, and I went that long without having a seizure. So
Wow.
it's up so far.
Yeah, that is pretty long time. So they go in, they remove all of the scar tissue.
Yeah.
Then they, let's see if I have it in order right. They go
Well,
in,
that was Louisville was the blood clot. The tissue was the
right,
next one in St. Louis.
right. Then they, so when they did the craniotomy, they remove the bone. They go in, they remove the blood clot, right?
Yeah.
Then they put the bone back in,
Yeah.
and then after that, they decide we're gonna try to remove the scar tissue, correct?
Well, that was when I was in Louisville first. The next year, that's when I kept having seizures. So I want to say straight year after cradiotomy. And then that's when my doctor in Louisville is like, you got to go to Children's Hospital. They can probably figure out what's going on. So, like a year later, went over to St. Louis, and then they're like, we're going to try a laser surgery to remove those damaged tissue. And that's why I ended up having 3 more surgeries because there were 3 different spots.
Okay,
Yeah.
so this, yeah, so the scar tissue was, they're saying that the scar tissue was in 3 different spots.
Well, they were all saying the left side, say in between the temporal and occipital section, but yeah, they had to go in and say close to the same area, but it's just not the exact same. They were just small itty bitty pieces, but that's what was causing the seizure.
Hmm. Yeah, that's nuts. That's super crazy.
Yeah, nice
So,
titanium plate added.
right? Does it? Do you? Right? Hard as a freaking rock, man.
uh,
Yeah.
Airport security is pretty entertaining. Yeah.
Does it go off at the airport?
So, not that often, but it's more like when they have those what do they call them?
The ones?
Well, yeah, it's like the guys, I can't remember what they call those guys. They're not police or anything, but they scan you, and they lifted it up high one time, and they're like, deep, like, you wearing any earrings? I'm like, no. And then I just kind of tapped my skull. They saw the scar. They're like, oh, okay.
Sorry ass, man. Sorry ass. Yeah. When I go through the thing too, it goes off as well. Yeah. So they for the one that they did the test where they opened it up and they put the
wires on there.
Wires on. Did they put you out for that one?
They knocked me out for that one, but then of course I woke up again, and then they were like, of course, yeah, I was still conscious while they had all these wires like on my actual brain, and they're like, okay,
that is so crazy.
No, it's freaky, but it was like a regular day too. It was just like, okay,
right?
You're gonna have your breakfast, but you're not gonna take your seizure medication. I was like, this is gonna be a bad day.
Gosh, dude, that's so nuts.
That's how they figured out the issue, but it was just like, ugh. It's like the one time you don't want to have a seizure, but they want you to have a seizure. It's like, great.
Right. So did they like show you it and like with the mirror and all that stuff? Were you able to see it?
Well, yeah. I mean, I was just eating breakfast. I was even trying to go to the bathroom, but I have to pull this thing along because I had these wires on my head.
Oh, dude, that is so freaking nuts, bro.
It was weird.
So nuts. So nuts. So apparently, it looks like Lynette also had brain surgery when she was awake, and it was not fun.
Yeah, I had cradiotomy like that once. That was, say, rather interesting. It's like it wasn't too bad. Of course, you couldn't move hardly at all or anything, but I just remember like waking up and even asking, I was like, are we done with surgery yet? They're like, no, not yet. I'm like, okay. And then say like a few minutes pass. Of course, I'm just being a jerk little kid. I'm like, how about now? They're like, no, not yet.
Shut up, kid. We're trying to work.
Yeah, it's like we're trying to do surgery on you and you keep talking. I remember asking for a glass of water and they were like, you're not allowed to have a glass of water because I think it was a blood loss and stuff like that. But I was like, I could really use a drink. They're like, no, you can't.
They didn't even give you like those.
They gave me like one small itty bitty cup when you go to the dentist office, like that small sippy cup.
Yeah.
Of course, I was like, that's it. They're like, yeah, you can't have any more. I'm like, this sucks.
Right. And so this all happened when you're 10 or 10, 11, 12? What?
That was when I was 10, say for the first one was cradiotomy. When I went to St. Louis, that was a year later, and that's when they did what was some type of laser surgery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and then, so all the surgeries, so it's 10 and 11, and then the surgeries were done after that?
Yeah. Okay. After, say, like 2000 to 2001, that was the end of the surgeries. And then they tried to reduce me on medication at first. Didn't work, so they did another fun MRI, and they kind of came to the conclusion that it's just because of what your brain tissue is missing. That's what causes the seizures. So they told me it's like, as long as you stay on your medication, that will stop the seizing. So as long as you do that, you're fine. And that's why I went over a decade without having a seizure.
That's kudos to you, man. That's awesome. Yeah. So do you ever have like a like instance where you like forget to take your medication and then you feel like a little funky and you're like, oh shoot, I need to take my medication?
Well, I did forget like one time. That was after they did the surgery. That was back in like 2002. So yeah, like right after I get done with surgery, I forget to take my meds one time. Or it wasn't just me because I was a 12-year-old, but the parents are like,
right.
How did we forget?
Mm-hmm.
But then we actually came up with this kind of system about 2004 or 5. We found this little pill holder. I love this thing. And I take pills at 8 o'clock in the morning and 8 o'clock in the afternoon. And this holds up to 2.5 weeks, and it just rotates in a circle. And it just beeps. So it's just like, okay, sweet. Oh, wow. I just have to keep this thing loaded. Other than that, I got an alarm on my phone. So it's like, it's very unlikely I'll forget.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, one thing about the seizure medication is, you know, the timing as far as when you take it each day in between the dosages. You know, it's imperative that you're consistent with it. You know,
yeah, I could probably say take one an hour earlier, an hour later, but
right.
That's about it.
I mean, I'm not speaking at you.
Yeah,
speaking with
that's just
everyone
like
else, because
this
obviously
is like
you know,
take it on time. Yeah.
yeah, obviously you know, but
We
yeah,
do have a little bit of a comedy story if you want to say like the last seizure I had, which was back in 12. And it wasn't actually because I forgot to take my medication, but because of the difference between brand name and generics. Because I'd been on generics for a while. I'm not saying they're bad, but that was also like the same time the economy had its little recession.
mhm.
So they kept switching me from one generic brand to another generic brand to another generic brand. I don't just take one type of seizure pill. I take what's called Keppra and Triliptal. So they kept switching them constantly. I was like, is this safe? And that's when I had a seizure. So it's like, obviously it's not safe. So
So
the doctors then were just putting me on brand name pill only. They're just like, we're just going to keep you on that. I'm like, okay, thumbs up.
we're gonna stick you with the expensive stuff, right?
Yeah, it's like the insurance covers it, but it's just like, yeah, insurance doesn't like me.
Right.
It's like all I have to pay is like $3, and they have to pay like $200. They're like, yeah,
Nice.
man.
Nice. Good for you for having good insurance, because that stuff, especially the Keppra, especially, well, now it's
Yeah,
not as expensive as it was before, but
yeah, but it used to be pretty expensive.
yeah, it was very expensive.
That was like when they first put me on it back in like 2000. It was like pretty expensive stuff.
Yeah, it was extremely expensive. Like at one point, I was having to go to, because I didn't have any insurance, and I was on a plethora of medications, and Keppra was one of them. And I think they wanted a G for the medication a month, $1,000. And
Yeah, it's
obviously,
ridiculous.
I couldn't afford that back then. So I was having to go to Tijuana every month to go get my medication, Mexico, to go get my medication every
Yeah, I've heard that going on before too. People would just kind of go over there because it's cheaper, and you can get, say, generic brands for a lot cheaper price.
month. Mhm. No, I mean it was actually Keppra. It wasn't even generic. It was Keppra, and I
Keppra
would get
itself,
it.
yeah,
It was Keppra, and I would get it down there for, I think, like $30 or something like that, which
yeah,
is
it's a lot
crazy,
cheaper than what it should be though.
Yeah,
It's just ridiculous the price.
yeah, I would get it for like $30 down in Tijuana, when over here they want to charge me like $900. You know what I mean? Which is
Yeah,
crazy. Yeah. So I was having to do that for a little bit, but and then what I ended up doing is found I contacted the manufacturer directly. So now I get my Keppra and my Vimpat from both manufacturers directly, and I get it for free from the
good
manufacturers.
deal.
Yep. So if anyone's listening, that's the way to go. Now the drug companies aren't gonna like me, but
But
yeah,
that's one way to do it. Yeah.
yeah, hit them up directly and be like, hey, can't afford this stuff. It's expensive. I need it. Um, and yeah, I get both medications for free. So yeah, that's the way to go. But so circling back to you, I'm sorry, I went off on a little tangent there, but excuse me. So all right, so now we talked about your surgery, or we talked about your AVM, we talked about your surgery. Now let's talk about how, being so young and going through that. Let's talk about fifth grade,
Well,
like what
fifth
it was
grade was,
like.
yeah, pretty
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah, let's talk about that. I want to know, because mine happened my freshman year. I want to know what it was for like a fifth grader going back to school, with the deficits that you had, trying to overcome that, trying to, follow the school curriculum, getting your homework done. I want to hear about all that, John.
Well,
Let's hear about it.
I had some good luck with it too because my mother actually taught at the school. She didn't teach fifth grade; she actually taught sixth grade. But still, it was pretty good. And most of the teachers, well, knew me because I had two older brothers, so they're like, okay, you're the little one.
Uh,
So pretty much most of them knew it, but they just didn't know like exactly what happened. I mean, they knew I had brain surgery, but it's just one thing that kind of sucks about us because we look like your average person, but we're quite a bit different after this.
mhm.
I mean, short-term memory, of course, was a major struggle. My brain was trying to focus and relearn all this stuff, and it's just a mess. I mean, it's like you go from gifted to non-gifted almost. You're like, this is not fun. But some subjects I was fine at. Other subjects, it's just kind of funny I wasn't good at.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for instance, math, kind of had my ups and downs with. Science and history was fine. English, ugh. I hated English.
Me too.
That's one thing that I kind of left out. But speech, like I said, like speech and eyesight was damaged. But the speech part's rather interesting because how that was like the reason I didn't like English is, of course, when you were in school, you have to read aloud. And I could read aloud actually fine. It's just my brain was so focused on pronunciation instead of memorization during it. So one of the therapists kind of explained, she said it was sort of like some people that are gifted with learning a second language and others that aren't. It's like, that's pretty much what you have. It's like, you can read it fine. It's just, you're not going to remember it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how, we live in a society where, kids can, not be as nice as they should be, especially, back, you know, 20, 30 years ago when, so how did the kids treat you when you went back to school?
Well, at first everybody just figured it'd be regular old me, but then it kind of like I went to being like a really bright kid to now like really shy. So everyone was a little confused with that. They're like, "What's going on, man?" It's like,
Mhm.
sorry, I'm just a little more shy because I'll be honest, sometimes I can't remember your name right off the bat. I'm sorry. Of course, I try and explain. It's like, no, you're just being lazy. It's like, no, I'm not being lazy. That's just this Windows 98 can't find the right file. Please wait.
Uh-huh. That's funny. Yeah.
So some people would like understand it later on, say most of the close friends, but not saying like everybody knew me yet. I mean, you get some new like student, of course, and you're like, yeah, so do I have to explain this story again? This is going to be a pain in the butt.
Mhm. Right. Now, did you ever like come up, so talking about explaining it to people, did you ever come up with like a fictitious story that you would tell people if you didn't want to explain exactly what happened to you?
Well, there's always the say short version. It's just like, hey, had an AVM rupture and then ended up having 4 surgeries. Problems are short-term memory loss. And I usually joke, I'm like, if you've ever seen the movie 50 First Dates, got a little 10-second Tom syndrome here. So sorry.
Right, right. So how did, obviously you were at a very young age, and you said that your siblings were 5 years apart, older than you. Did you feel like, I mean, we haven't talked about this, so I don't know. If you don't want to share it, you don't have to. Did you feel like it brought you guys closer together?
I thought it was fine, really. I mean, I have 2 older brothers. We were always pretty close.
Okay.
I never had an issue with them. Still stay in touch with them to this day plenty of times.
Awesome. Awesome. Very cool. Very cool. And did anyone ever share like if it shifted like the family dynamic in any certain way, as far as like in any way did it shift like the way that the direction of the family was going? Because I know that, obviously it's a traumatic event, and everyone, obviously your parents are, during that time frame focused, they're worried about you, so
Yeah.
obviously, you're their baby, so, and it's an extended amount of time, I was 2 years there, so, did it shift like the family dynamics in any direction? Did anybody talk about that at all? Or
Well, if anybody was stressed out, it was the most because it was like my mother the most because she was a
Mhm.
school teacher. So she was like when I was in St. Louis, she was, of course, not at work. And she's over like with me in St. Louis for about 2.5 months. So she's, of course, like missing work. And she's a little stressed out with that. Dad had actually kind of got a little lucky because he retired just like right as this happened.
Mhm.
So he was like, okay, I'm fine with it. But I mean, it's say was just like kind of struggling at first because of the short-term memory loss. They're like, I don't know how to deal with this because it's not like, say, stressful, but I just forget minor things. They'd be like, it's like you forgot to turn the stove off. It's like, sorry. That's why they made watches and they gave me plenty of watches.
Yeah, that's too funny. That's too funny. Now let's go to your adolescence now. So this all happened 10, 11, right? So how did your teenage years play out? Did this have a factor? Did anything like were you able to live? Do you feel like you're able to live normal teenage years, or how do you think that happened?
Like, well, the teenage years, you'd say at first, like when I was 13 to maybe like 14, still a little crazy because that was like right after recovery. When I was about 15, things are say starting to be normal again. But it's just that's when you get to high school, you meet a lot of new people, and you're like, do I tell them the backstory or do I not tell them the backstory? Is always kind of the question when it comes to that. And then, of course, when I got a driver's license, of course, everyone's freaked out because they're like, well, he could have a seizure, but he's gone like 4 years without having one. So it's just cross your fingers. But only been in one car accident, and that wasn't actually until I was 21. And no,
Mm.
wasn't drinking. Kind of a funny story. Got run over by a 90-year-old woman. She just didn't spot me, and she pulled out of the four-way and bumped my Jeep. I was like, oh, great.
I know, right? And
As for driving altogether, the only thing I don't like about driving is, of course, when I get to like a major city where there's 8 lanes. Since I have bad right peripheral vision, I'm just like, oh, I don't want to drive here.
uh, so I mean, it sounds like then you had fairly normal uh, high school years then.
High school, there would say some subjects were a little bit more tricky, but say only some. Like math wise, I mean, everybody's kind of got their own way with math. Like algebra, I'll admit, didn't care too much for it, but geometry I really liked. And then science ways, physics and biology was okay, but chemistry, no, I'd probably blow something up. Sorry. As far as English, I mean, it was okay. It's just those weird books you're forced to read, and you're like, why am I reading this book?
Right, right, right. And so all right, so we talked about grade school, we talked about high school. So now let's talk about John in adulthood. How was it like transitioning to adulthood with everything that has went on throughout your life? Did you find it easy transition? Did you feel like it was flawless?
Well, a little bit of ups and downs. I actually went on to college, and I don't know, remember what this company's called, but somehow, like a friend of my mother's found this one area where they actually met up with a group that went to like the college that had people that had traumatic brain injuries. So I kind of stayed in touch, met with people like that. But you could say it's always entertaining when I had to introduce myself because everyone else kind of would joke about it because it's, of course, always guys that have the brain injuries. But
Mm.
and what I mean by that is it's pretty much like all these guys that were in there that were I was talking to had been mostly because of motorcycles or car wrecks. And then, of course, they're like, okay, new guy, John, what are you here for? It's like, nothing. I had a brain AVM. And they're like, so what caused it? I'm like, nothing. I was born with it. So
Right.
everyone's like, well, that sucks. It's like, we all kind of did something. I'm like, yeah, you guys had an accident, but
Uh,
still.
yeah. So, so do you find it difficult now that you're in your adult life? Do you find it difficult to form relationships or anything like that?
Well, friend relationships, I never had too much of a like problem with because I had plenty of them. As far as say a girlfriend or anything like that, it's been a while, but that's just because I live in such a small town. There's, I'll admit, not that many. But then also, like the last girl I dated, I was basically high school, early college days, but everybody goes their own way when it comes to college. That's kind of the part where you're like, that kind of sucks. For instance, like I live in Southern Illinois. The last girl I dated when she got done with college lives all the way in California now, of course. So it's like, yeah, that's long distance.
Yeah. Those usually don't work out anyways, right? The long
Yeah.
distance one.
I mean, we kind of went our own way. It was like our sophomore year in college. It's like, yeah, we're probably not going to meet up again.
All right.
So of course I'm like, maybe I'll find somebody else. But then like every other girl you meet's already dating somebody. So you're like, okay, I'm the lone fish. Okay.
It'll come sometime, brother. It comes when you least expect it. That's how it works.
Yeah, it usually does. I mean,
Yeah.
I still have no problem with it because I've even like one thing is kind of off subject is like sometimes I have to go help out at a church event and it's called the singles talk and I've had to give that one before. I'm like, okay.
That's funny. That's funny. So, do you have any concluding thoughts for the community, John?
Well, the only thing I could really say is it's going to be one heck of a ride, but try and just keep the path. Just keep your best hopes up, keep everything smooth. Definitely check for help. It's like, don't think you're the only person out there that's dealt with one of these, but try and keep in relationships as much as you can because it's also great to have relationships. Because even when I was in the hospital, I'd get letters from family, friends, and it's like, hey, remember this is 2002. We didn't have FaceTime.
Right? That's funny. That is too funny.
I mean, there is one other one that I should probably mention one other website. It's called avmsurvivors.org. So sometimes I get on there and chat with people. It's not, say, perfect like Facebook or anything, but sometimes people just put up like a question mark like, hey, how do I deal with this issue? And sometimes I respond to that. It's just like, here's what I've dealt with. Maybe this will help you.
Yeah.
Just small things like that.
Yeah. And that's the whole purpose, that the whole reason why, I started this is because, as you said, with the answering those questions, you want to help, those that, that might be looking for questions or whatever. And that's the whole reason why I started, this show was to, let other survivors know that they're not alone and, that they might be able to connect with one of the guests, and realize, that, oh, they're going through a similar journey that I'm going through. And, that, oh, this is how they handled that situation, or this is how they overcame that obstacle. And when they come into that situation or obstacle, then they can look back on it and come to the realization, oh, okay, they can do it, I can do it too. You know what I mean? And that's the whole reason why, this show is where it's at. And I love the fact that you go on to that website, John, and you share, because you are an AVM OG. So you go on there and you share all your wisdom, because there are a lot of young survivors out there that are feeling lost, and not knowing where to go, not knowing where to turn to, and you're out there sharing, what with them. And I appreciate you for that. And I know that they appreciate you for that. And so Lynette wants to know how old you are. I think she has someone she wants to hook you up with, John.
30. That's why I'm not. 30 years old now. So, yeah.
30. The dirty 30.
The 20th anniversary of this.
There you go. Hey, I can hear it too. I can hear it when you hit it.
Yeah, there's a little.
It's pretty loud. Yeah, I can hear it. I can hear it. Yeah, it's pretty loud. So I conclude again, John. I thank you so much for coming on here and sharing your story with everyone that's going to be watching this. And as I stated in the beginning, I hope that they're able to grab a piece of your story as inspiration. And I conclude all of my shows with the prayer. So let's do it.
All right.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for putting John in my path so that he can help young survivors, letting them know that he was a young survivor himself and overcame and persevered all the obstacles in his path, showing that he overcame all those obstacles and is sitting here in front of us, striving and thriving. And I ask that you continue to look over our community. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. John,
Yep.
thank you so much, brother. I appreciate you.
You're welcome.
And if you are going to watch next week, you have to bring 2 friends or you're not invited. And don't forget to subscribe. Thank you so much for coming.